Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining me on International Women's Day. On the panel for this webinar, we have got Liz Connolly, and as everyone knows, Liz is our Principal and Chief Executive at West College, Scotland. We also have Amy MacDonald. Amy is our Vice Principal of Operations, and Sharon Doncaster, who is our Estates Manager. So thank you very much, ladies, for joining us this afternoon. It's a great cause for celebration every year when International Women's Day comes around, and we wanted to mark it as a West College Scotland community as well. I guess just one of the first questions is, and Liz, I'll come to you first. What does International Women's Day mean to you?
Oh, that's such a good question, Paul. And I suppose that to me, it's about acknowledging and celebrating the contribution that women make to our economy, to society, to have made to history, will make to the future. But I suppose it's one of those things that you think, I hope in my lifetime that we'd no longer need to have an International Women's Day, because we will have no discrimination, no bias whatsoever, and women will just continue to contribute to society as they always have done, and that'll be acknowledged.
Thanks, Liz. Sharon, what about you?
Well, I feel for me it's celebrating women's achievements as well. And we go way back to, and I've got a lecture here, Emily Pankhurst for getting us the vote. There's so many women in different countries who can't vote. So to be that far just now, even though we've still got some discrimination going on, being able to vote is one big thing. And I'm always saying that to my girls when voting day comes along. And I'll say, if you've voted yet, get out there, get yourself voted, never let that go. And for me, that's a big thing. So I think it's celebrating our achievements and how far we've actually came from a way back in the day to now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the suffragettes movement, I'm so glad that they've actually taken the time recently to document it better and televise it, and in film as well. We've had so many great examples to actually show what these women did in order to get the vote. So I think that's a really important point to make as well, Sharon. And it's recent history as well. A lot of people think it's a really long time ago, but really it's not.
I feel as if that sounded quite twee there, but it's just something I feel. I mean, I'm not a suffragette. I'm not going to go and tie myself the railings out there because I can't get a cream bun or something like that. But I think it is really important that we can get there and vote.
Yeah, definitely. And Amy, what does International Women's Day mean to you?
Well, I think, Paul, it's a good question. I think that it's a really nice day that we have where we recognise people's achievements. But for me, there's a bit for reminding the men that there shouldn't be any unconscious bias. They probably don't recognise it as such. But I think Liz made a very good point that we shouldn't really need to have a day, but we do still at the moment, just because of the environment that we've grown up in. And things have changed considerably, say, over the last 20 odd years since I've been working. But I don't think we're quite there as much as we would like to be. So days like this are really important to find out people's journeys in life, to feel that there are role models out there for women that maybe feel that they might not have the same opportunities, and to make sure those pathways are clear for people. And I think it's great that we can come together and just discuss our experiences to help others as well. So it's a very positive environment to be in just now.
Great, and I guess on that, Amy, talking about reminding men, when I was asked, first of all to be the moderator of the panel, I felt almost like a fraud at first, going, you're asking a man to moderate it. But then when I started to reflect on it and think about it, is that actually men do have a role in International Women's Day, and it's to be an ally for women and to break the bias, which is the theme of this year's International Women's Day. Amy, what do you think that men can do to be that ally?
I think there was it's a really good quote. I think it came out when Andy Murray had won Wimbledon, the fact that he was a feminist. So I think it's that women need to be far more active in that space, and, working with fellow men to say that, fairness and what fairness is, because it's not necessarily what you see. I think one of the discussion points that people have these days is that sometimes women are the butt of jokes. being bad drivers and, not being as good as their male equivalents. And that is a little bit of unconscious bias there. And we don't know how that feeds through. But I mean, and certainly I'll admit, maybe I'm not the best driver in the world, but certainly it shouldn't be a general sweeping statement across all women who are very good drivers. So I think there's a bit for me around that, is that, sometimes it goes beyond a joke, but if you find it's politically acceptable to make jokes around women, and sometimes, it is, and sometimes it isn't, then there's some things that come from that. And I talked about that unconscious bias. You have that if you make jokes around women. And I think that's kind of a key thing there. So how can we make a change? It's about looking at all aspects, not just singling out women in the workplace. It's how women are treated in society and what opportunities, therefore, that they get. Very much it might be considered a generational issue as well. Certainly when I started work, it was all male managers. There were no female role models that I had for quite a long time. I did an engineering degree, so there weren't a lot of women in engineering at the time, and there were very few girls. But certainly I didn't feel any bias towards women at that point. When I went off and did my summer placement, I was still treated as the lowest of the low and had to do the work that the lowest of the low had to do, and that was fine. It was a good learning experience. So I didn't really experience bias, other than that career wasn't attractive to women. It wasn't pleasant. I was digging holes. It was all muddy. It was mucky. I didn't really enjoy that too much, but I liked getting, achieving and doing a piece of work. But it wouldn't be a career that would immediately be drawn out for a woman's job. It was pretty hard work. It was pretty physical. So, and I think that there had been bias there, because obviously it was me and 15 men that were working there. I'm like, where are all the other junior trainees? There weren't any. And it just was. Sorry, Sharon?
Did you find you were saying you were digging holes there? Did you get any men saying, "Oh, let me help you"? That's a big job for a wee woman.
No, it's like, this spade will suit you. Get on with it.
Just get on
and
with
what
it.
size of wellies are? I don't know if we've got size 6. You'll need to wear a 7. But that was quite good. It was just, they very much saw me as part of the team. So they weren't holding bias. They saw me as an equal. So that was good. And that was over 20 years ago. But again, there were no women engineers at all. I was the only woman. It was stark, and that stood out. And that had an impact on me. I decided I'm not up for this. I didn't like that. So I went off and became an accountant. So it did have an impact on me, just because there weren't any women in that environment. And you don't make, a friendship, group. It's all the guys go off, right? They're off doing their thing, and there's sit there by myself. Yeah. So the friendship group was different. I didn't feel like I could fit in. It wasn't an experience that I thought this is going to be a career for me in the long term. And it did put me off. So we need to have these sorts of things, saying that it doesn't matter what type of job, everybody's capable of it, and they can get a start and have a shot of it. I think that's a really important thing to kind of recognise, that just because a job is traditionally a male type of role, that doesn't mean that women can't do it. They're equally capable, so they should get an equal chance as well. And then that might have been, if it had been there, if it had been 15 girls, I probably would have still been there now. That's the difference that may be made. So it's quite interesting when you look back.
Did you feel that the males made you feel intimidated and like that? Is that why you didn't like it, or did you just feel as though it was, I just got you never done another female, like, because they're away for a pint and you want to kind of sit there with a coffee or something?
I think there was definitely a wee bit of intimidation, but probably from the fact that I wasn't as strong as them. So I'm maybe not contributing as much to the team particularly. But when it came down to doing the technical work, I was okay at that. It was just the physical bit I wasn't as strong at. Because I'm little and they're big and strong. So obviously I was at an unfair advantage there. But if we'd worked the team differently, I could have just done the technical bit where it was joining of the cables, and where it was more skill orientated, and where the strength was required, they could have focused more on that. So there's a bit about teaming and roles in a team and how to work together. You still get the same outcome, but everyone takes the role where their skill is strongest. So
I'm glad you mentioned Andy Murray, Amy, because I was reading an interview with him recently, and it was just after he won his second medal in the Olympics. And the interviewer said, "Oh, you're the first tennis player to win 2 medals." To which he replied, "I'm sure Venus and Serena would have something to say about that." So again, there was that bias even of the interviewer to say, "You're the first Olympian." He said, "No, I'm not. Women have done it better than me beforehand." Liz, you've got an experience of that kind of male-dominated environment, and women. What can women do to succeed in those kind of male-dominated environments?
Yeah, And you're right, Paul, you know, when I started work, which was many years ago, you know, kind of there were no senior female managers or leaders in the organisation I worked for. And I suppose in many ways, you know, kind of back then women felt, and I'm sure many women still feel, that they had to work harder and to do more in order to achieve the same as some of the male counterparts, just because there was nobody there speaking up for them within the organisation. I have to say, though, I'm delighted that, you know, in, you know, a relatively short period of time, that situation has, in a lot of industries, has reversed. And we see, and I suppose we see particularly in the public sector, that, you know, kind of women are in more senior positions. And I don't know if that's because, you know, and sometimes, you know, the public sector is a bit more understanding of the role that women have beyond their work, so it's easier to have children and to raise your children and not to feel you have to sacrifice. Now that's, and just as we shouldn't be making, you know, biased statements about women or men, I probably shouldn't be doing the same about the public sector and the private sector, but you know, there's definitely some industries where it's easier for women's talents to shine and to come through and to be celebrated. And I suppose, you know, to the point, I was just reflecting when Amy was speaking about what men can do. Men are, you know, every child has got two parents. You know, the role that men have with their children in terms of what they're teaching their sons as much as their daughters, yeah, about what's acceptable and how to behave and the things that you should consider. You know, that is just so critically important that we get that message right for youngsters, and men have got a huge role to play in influencing their own children.
Yeah, I think, Liz, what you were saying there as well about, you know, in public sector, there's definitely been a push for women. I think the Scottish Government mandated that they would like boards to be 50% women, which was a really positive step forward, because then that creates positive role models for everybody in the organisation, and that kind of does filter down as well. So sometimes there has to be a positive move, if you like, to help and upset what's been an accepted norm for a long period of time, albeit it's positive discrimination for women, but it has such a positive effect on the organisation. So you can see the benefits of that, which you're reflecting on.
Absolutely, Amy. And, you know, if I reflect on, you know, when I started my career and now, you know, there's been so many different policy perspectives that have supported women into the workforce and supported women to participate in the workforce and therefore to succeed in the workforce. And, you know, I mean, that can only be for good.
I mean, last year they were trying to promote female train drivers. They had a big promotion on for that, because it's just always been for years male dominated, and they were trying to promote for the females good salaries, good training, saying good working hours, because you can work shifts and you can maybe work your shifts around your partner, your husband or your wife, whatever you've got. And that was really quite good to do that, and they get a big take on that to take up the train driving.
Yeah, and I think, you know, legislation has been very, very positive in all of these initiatives it's been doing. I mean, even in terms of the Equality Act, you know, helps not just in terms of that gender bias, but with it when it comes to maternity and all of these different things when it comes into discrimination. You know, I remember, you know, doing studies around the Equality Act, and some of the reasoning behind it was because women were being indirectly discriminated because of things like maternity leave, etc. But why, you know, despite this great leap forward in terms of legislation, why do you think there's still a bias to break? What more needs to be done?
Well, I guess, Paul, you know, if we don't yet have that perfect world, do we? And, you know, there's something as well about, you know, those of us in more developed nations with more developed and progressive economies also supporting, you know, kind of women globally. And there are still, you know, some horrendous situations that are happening globally with women and the discrimination against women. You know, so I think the whole International Women's Day, that international peace is so important. And there's something about, solidarity with women right around the globe, and making sure that those of us who have lived through an environment that's become more progressive and easier for women to have their say and to be recognised, that we continue to support females around the world who sadly don't have that.
Also, I think the past generation, I mean, the younger people now are growing up with all these equalities and legislation. Back in my granddad's doing everything, they come in, gave my granny her housekeeping money, and she stayed at home and he went to work. So, and I think as people are progressing through the years, younger people are now saying, well, mum does go to work, so does dad go to work, and we're all kind of chipping in, doing the housework and all that together. Sometimes there's not just that role of the way the traditional mum role, dad role. And I think as we progress through the years, it's getting better. I think it is getting better.
Sharon, I think you make a good point as well about people's expectations as they grow up. Everybody should be treated as an equal.
Yeah,
That's the kind of thing, is that everybody's an equal now. So when they move into the workplace or into any environment, that's what they expect to see, people treated in the same way. So I think that it's as well in some organisations, the way that they have evolved. Sometimes things take a while to change. So, but it's really important that we don't upset people's expectations, that if it's not quite as they expect to see it, they know that why, and that it is changing. So I think these are kind of key things as well, that, that it's difficult sometimes, depending on your age group and the group of people that you socialise with, that you understand what the expectations of everybody are. And you kind of have to be aware of that so that you can make sure that that's in your messaging, so that people don't get disheartened, or they don't feel this isn't quite what I was expecting. So you can understand why, but it doesn't mean that that's because we're biased in any way. It's just because it takes a while to put these things in place. So my example with the engineers earlier, so that still is that probably, that's the case quite a lot of the time just now still, but it doesn't mean it always needs to be like that. It just means that we need to make sure we highlight to people that, you can go and do that if you want to do that. It's up to you. It's your choice. We'll let you do that. There's not ever going to be a barrier to entry that stops people doing things that they want to do. So I think that's the benefit with, communications these days. It's really easy to get good, positive messages out there. Certainly in our country, I think, Liz, you make a really good point about the fact this is International Women's Day. And it would be really great if everybody in the whole world had the same kind of legislation that we do, because in some countries around the world, women still are treated a wee bit like that, Sharon. And I think it's about the success of International Women's Day. It's just not about what's happened in this country, but how people are treated all around the world. Exactly. And that's maybe the bigger challenge for us moving forward. How do we help other countries that maybe are a wee bit further behind on their journey, get to the point where we are just now? And then essentially, how do we still become that good role model country as we move forward? What else do we need to do, in recognising that as well? So all opportunities, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, you're all mentioning about, kind of other countries and what they, and sometimes, the way they treat women is horrendous, and in any kind of underrepresented groups, it's usually the same. One of my favourite stories about the Queen is when the head of state was coming from the Middle East, in a country where women were not even allowed to drive, and the Queen picked him up in her Jeep and drove him to prove that point. And I think that that's one great role modelling of saying, actually, this is how we do it, and this is how you should treat women. And I just think that that's a great example of that, in terms of what you were saying, is that it is about role modelling, and it is about looking at other ways of doing things. And it's even interesting, Sharon, talking about expectations there. And I guess even for me in my 30s, when I was growing up, the expectation was a nuclear family, and that was it. And very much, mum's role, even if she was working, mum's role was still to look after the kids. But that even has moved on in a short period of time, and nuclear family is not the only good way of having a family, and those roles do seem to be, in a lot of cases, more equal. Do you think that's helping and that's contributing to the furtherment of women's empowerment?
Yeah, I think absolutely, Paul, and even to the extent that, we mentioned legislation, but how helpful it is. So paternity leave, it doesn't need to be maternity all for the women, so you've got these options now. You can decide what you want to do and you can share responsibilities across both parents or both partners. People don't need to be married, same-sex couples as well. I think, there's just so much more acceptance of that in society, where people previously would have been afraid to kind of admit what their orientation is because they would experience bias, just in the same way that women maybe felt in the past that they would be prejudiced against, say, Sharon, when you were doing HR when you were younger, that people, young women, you check and see, right, are they of childbearing age? Right, well, we'll need to consider whether they get a job interview or not. Those sorts of days are long gone, thankfully, and the flexibility that we have, in the workplace to make sure that doesn't happen is great. And I just can't see that happening anymore. That just shows you how far we've moved on, that you would want to have people with different backgrounds because they bring so much more perspective to the workplace. Imagine if it was all men, what it would be like. They wouldn't have the same appreciation. You really need that woman's viewpoint. And it's not that women think differently. It's about people think differently. It doesn't matter who they are, what their background is. You need to have that wide variety of knowledge and skill set and opinion to help shape what the outcome should be. So all these things, whilst we, it's kind of a figurehead day when you have International Women's Day, it's really a reminder, isn't it? And a kind of a reset point almost, that you say, right, are we still on track? Are we still doing things right? And it's really good to kind of pick yourself up as well. So I can definitely see the benefit of it.
Oh, without question. And, Paul, just the more that things are normalised, the more normal they become. So the more we see women in senior positions, the more we see women engineers, and indeed male care workers. And, because there's, in terms of employment, there's bias in many ways, isn't there, in terms of what's considered a man's role or a woman's role. But the more that it becomes normalised, it just becomes normal. And, I would certainly hope that the generations coming behind us, just have an expectation that they'll be treated equally and be treated the same, because why wouldn't they be?
Yeah, it's still a thing though, definitely, when you look at, I think, Liz, the college and Sharon also, it's a really interesting environment, because I think it's a really good point, Liz, you raise about men can be equally good care workers, yet the majority of our care students are female. And like the majority of our apprentices are male, and we don't have many female students in those areas. So you can see, although all the legislation is in place, there's just other things that we're going to have to think of, perhaps, because we've still got these career paths that are still very much either male dominated or female dominated. So that's probably what the progression of International Women's Day is going forward. There's identification of where there is opportunity for women that might like to really, enjoy practical careers like that, but maybe they feel that they can't just now because there's no other women that will go with them. And, so how do you change things like that? I mean, we're sitting in a prime position where we can hopefully influence people coming from school leavers, where, I think it's the school that you really need to get to people when they're young and they can see that there are these opportunities. Generally, when people leave school, they have a broad direction of where their career path might be going, but it's maybe more difficult to change in the future. So it's about what we can do and opportunities in that space, which we are doing, but maybe there's kind of like there needs to be more done. We can ask ourselves that question. I think it's about challenging yourself sometimes as well, in that area.
That's a good point, Amy, you mentioned with the schools, and it's quite good when the schools come here to college. They get wee taster courses, so the girls are getting a chance to go in and get a shot of brickwork, and the boys are getting a chance to go into the care section or even the cookery. I know you get a lot of the male chefs are great and everything, but sometimes boys think, or even dance, oh, I don't want to go and do that sort of thing, but they get a chance to do all that, a wee taster of everything when they come in. And I think that's really, really good. And then it gets the kids, when they are younger, to give them a wee taste of those kind of engineering or joiners, that kind of, we always think it's a man's role.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You picked up, in terms of when it came in hospitality, Sharon. There is still, and I don't get it myself. There is this still terms of saying that males are chefs and females are cooks.
Yeah,
and it's something that I've never actually understood. they are all chefs. It doesn't matter, what gender that you are, because I was the manager of a bistro, and we were advertising for a cook or a chef, and I said, no, we're just advertising for a chef. It doesn't matter. And I think those language barriers can sometimes be a barrier to females as well, and just making sure that when people are advertising for these posts, that they are being gender neutral, because you don't have to go down one line or another. It has to be all encompassing.
I think that's absolutely right, Paul. And we see it. I was reading something the other day about, now I think it's coming from like the Chamber of Commerce movement and the IOD and such like, is to make language in a corporate sense gender neutral. So we would talk about a chair rather than a chairman, because we as a college have got a female chair, whereas a lot of the language is still quite outdated. So I think that's a really positive move to change that and to move on to where it's gender neutral language.
Even Liz, even to the point that, plumber, most people will be expecting a plumber to be a man.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and a joiner to be a man. So it's kind of like it goes beyond almost, it's great that we can change those words, but where there's all the perceptions that these roles are males' roles, that's the kind of thing that we need to be going on, a plumberess or a joineress or whatever it is. That don't need to go that far, but so people pull your word about chefs, they can be men and women, so joiners can be, and plumbers as well. But you automatically, I'm sure if you got a plumber turn up at your door, you might expect it to be a man. So if it's a woman that comes in, so that's just these perceptions that we've got in society that we need to kind of get over as well.
I remember years ago before I went to uni and everything, and I was working in an office, and I was a clerkess, and the guy next to me was a clerk. And I remember way back then, I was like, what's the difference? And he says, well, I don't know. And I was like, all right, and we just carried on doing my work. So he was a clerk and I was a clerkess, but both of us just clerks at the end of the day. But way back then, it was kind of like, oh, well, you're a female, I'm a man, whatever, that's why the difference is. And we just carried on. But we never questioned it any further than that. But you say, is it going to be a plumberess or a joineress? It's just plumbers and joiners, isn't it?
Yeah, because I can remember, in a bar, you would have a manageress as well.
Yes, that's right.
Or like waitress, stewardess. Adding an S on to words that were already gender neutral actually doesn't do anything. Someone's a steward, and that's what they are. They're waiting staff. They're a manager. You don't have to add an S on, because it's the same job.
Same job.
And actually that might take away from it, and like you were saying, Sharon, it could get people to question, actually, are they doing the same thing?
Well, I do the same job as two of my male counterparts. So so we're all managers, three of us managers. So that's like me saying, like, they're estate managers and I've been estate manageress. But I found that in a lot of times, and I found a female in a male role at times, not male role, but male environment. And depending on who you were speaking to, I don't want to be saying names, but depending on who you were speaking to, sometimes I felt like the manageress. I felt I was a female, because I would come up with suggestions and say, why don't we do it this way? And I would say it, and one of my male counterparts would say the exact same thing. They'd be like, that's a great idea. And I'm like, I just said that 2 minutes ago. So you kind of sit back, and I'm quite forthright, as we all know. Can I say what I think? I'll say, wait a minute. I literally just said that. No, you didn't. You said it this. And I said, what I said was, and I would argue my point. And again, so I get that feeling sometimes I was the manageress rather than just being a manager. And I think sometimes going forward, as long as you are confident in what you're saying. Oh, sorry, that's my work phone. Sorry about that. Sometimes I think going forward and being in the role I'm in, I can make jokes with myself, like we all can. We can laugh at female jokes, male jokes, and you can't take yourself too seriously at times. But I feel as if sometimes in the female role, I have to prove that I'm as good as the male. And even though a lot of it comes from language, the language you use, and I used to always say to, like, as I say, we were talking the ladies or girls, and I was speaking to the supervisor, different things, and I'll say, whatever you do, if one of them upset you, one of the males, do not show them that you're upset and in tears. Come in, shut your door and shut it, because I feel as if that shows a wee bit of weakness, because then they can get you kind of like, well, oh, she's a female, there she is, started bubbling. Now, that bubbling could be females, menopause, time of the month, things could be going on with your family. But I feel sometimes in a male environment, women do get a hard time. But in other times, if you just want to be treated respectful like everybody else is treated, the way you would treat everybody else, equality, respectfulness. But sometimes it goes back depending on what generation the person you're speaking to comes from, goes back to a way back in their day. Then they would see, well, Sharon, you're sitting here in a manager's role. Why are you not at home kind of looking after the grandchildren? Why are you still here? When are you going to be retiring? Well, I don't feel like retire. I'm quite happy still here working away and getting things done. All right, okay. Sorry, I was off on a tangent there.
No, not at all. Not at all. And I guess, estates and facilities management, Sharon, is in a lot of ways that male-dominated environment. What advice would you have for any females who are wanting to go into estates and facilities management?
Well, you never hear anybody who grows up and says, oh, I want to be a facilities manager. Oh, I'm going to be an estates manager. When you're growing up, you're going to be, I used to always want to be an accountant, but accounting is not my forte, so that was never going to happen. And I used to think, well, when I come back in a second life, I'll come back as an accountant. But being a facilities manager, estates managers, I enjoy it. It's a variety every single day. So as long as you can treat people with respect, don't think you know everything. Don't think, because every day is a school day. You won't know everything. Don't try to know everything, because I think sometimes some women kind of think, I've got to prove myself. I'm in a man's world here. I've got to prove myself. So I'm not going to say, I need help. If you need help, ask for help. And you can get it. And I think you get respect for that as well. But at the same time, be yourself, be confident, and just know your stuff. You're always going to get somebody who tries to trip you up, basically. Oh, you're a female, you're not going to know that. But then you come back and you know it. You might say it in a different way, and they're like, oh, well, God, she does know her stuff.
Yeah. Amy, you've had a very kind of varied career path. Is there anything that you've come across over the course of your career that for other females you think, I wish I had known that then, that might be good to tell other females now?
So I think it's to respect everybody's views, but sometimes you have to be really firm, like Sharon said, because it's that firmness that gives you the respect of your male colleagues at times. And it's about not being afraid to speak up when you've got a really valid point. You might not always be right, and people might not always agree with you, but it's just about having that degree of confidence. And just because you're within an environment that might be quite intimidating, that doesn't mean that your point's not equally valid. So I would always encourage people to be confident. It doesn't matter who you are, what role you are. If you've got a valid point, you should definitely have the confidence to bring that forward, and people will eventually respect that, and it works after a while. But you have to really set yourself out there, and sometimes you have to be stronger than you might otherwise have thought. You thought, gosh, I can't believe I'm going to be able to do this, but yeah, you do that, and then it makes it easier all the next steps that you go along on your journey. So it's almost like having a turning point where you decide, right, let's go for this, and get that extra confidence, especially in a male-dominated environment. Once you've done it once, it's so much easier each of the next times that you need to do that, and people view you differently then as well. So I would give that. I would say to people, try and be confident, try and get your point across. Don't feel that you can't get your point across because you're a woman. You just make that point, make it well, and be involved in the discussion that you might not ordinarily be in. And I talked about teaming earlier. Your team's only as strong as the people that are within it. So sometimes, you need to, your point is very valid because it can change the direction to be a more positive one if it's kind of veering off course. So be confident, don't think your point's not valid, and believe in yourself as well. I think it's, you've got to have that belief, and it definitely works. So I would encourage those things.
And Liz, for the first time in West College, Scotland, you're leading an all-female executive team, which I think is fantastic. And what advice do you have for females who are looking to get into leadership roles?
I suppose a number of things, and I would agree with everything that Amy said there about confidence and almost about facing into your fears because if you do that in any aspect of life, you usually come through it kind of more positively. I think, when I reflect back in my career, and I suppose I should say this isn't the first time I've had an all-female management team. That happened just as happened this time. You appoint the best person for the job, and you don't consider gender, so that had happened before. And I think, though, for women, there is something about being prepared to take help. So again, it's, Sharon's point of don't think you know everything. And over my own career, I actually worked for some great managers, most of whom were men, who really encouraged me, who didn't consider that my gender was an issue. They really just supported me and encouraged me. So I would say take help when it's being offered, because it's genuinely most times being offered out of someone wanting to support you and to see you doing better and to see you progressing and developing well. Because, as a manager, there's probably nothing more rewarding than seeing someone that has worked for you actually progressing and going forward. That's tremendously fulfilling. So, most people want to help, so take it when offered. Challenge yourself as well. Don't be afraid to volunteer for things that are a little bit outside your comfort zone, because that's often the only way to learn. And I guess be prepared to apply for other jobs, even if you can't do 150% of them, because very often women won't put themselves forward for something unless they're sure that they can do every single part of a job spec. Imagine how dull your life would be if on day one you could do everything that was in your job. Where's the stretch? Where's the development? How do you build your own knowledge and expertise? So, basically don't be afraid. Go for it. Why not? Because what's the worst thing that can happen?
That's good. That's good advice. That's true. Because you do think that. You do think to yourself, oh, I can't do that wee bit. Like, well, I better not go for it. And you find out you probably can, but sometimes women aren't good at blowing your own trumpet and somebody else do it for you, and you're like that. Oh, God, I can do that. I know when I get something right, especially when it comes to when there's counting in it, and I'm thinking, oh, I get that all right, then I got to chuff myself. And I think, right, okay. But it's good advice.
Oh, thanks, Sharon. And as I said, over my career, I've had so much help and support from the people that I worked for.
Yeah.
And actually, until I worked for Audrey, I had never worked for a woman before. I've always
worked for them.
Mm-hmm. And so Audrey was the first woman that I worked for. For those that don't know, Audrey was our last principal here at the college. So I've had a lot of support from men as well as kind of women. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and to recognise that most times will be the case.
Yeah. And what, Amy, you said, you're only as good as your team as well, and that does help. You're a team respect and everything, whether it's a male environment team or female environment team. If they respect you and you go on well together and you can speak freely. I find in my department, estates, and the guys will tell you, we're all very vocal. We can have some big, massive issue fighting and arguing, and we're really loud. And then 2 minutes later, someone will say, so who's making the coffee? And you're thinking you're thinking, right, okay, that's good, because you don't always have to agree with what's going on. But if you can discuss it and find your way going forward, I think that's also good. That helps. And you also know, until you get a bad manager, you always know you've had good managers with bad managers. And until you get a bad manager, you think, oh my God, the last load of managers had were brilliant. And then you get something happens and you move on to somebody else. And it's just your how you go on with people as well. Because not everybody, as we say, we spend most of our time at work, so we end up with work family. So I always say, that's it. If I'm away for the day at another college, I'll phone in and say, that's me, I'm heading home. And I think, right, because I'm coming to college, that's me, I'm heading home. And you come in and you get your familiarity of your own people and your own campus and different things back into your own team. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the team environment does have a big part to play, doesn't it? And it's about and how you can all contribute to each other and contribute to your team goals. My last organisation, I was in a team that was all female apart from me and the manager. And we were a very high performing team because we played to each other's strengths. And it wasn't about, gender didn't come into it. We all learned from each other, and it was, oh, right, we need someone who is good at taking notes, right? Paul, you're the one for that. We need someone who's really good at the strategic side of it. Joyce, you're the one for that. So it's about each individual's capabilities. And when gender doesn't come into it, then that's the best way. And I guess that's what you were saying as well, Liz, about females get into leadership positions because they are the best ones for the job, not because you're trying to get a quota or to do what you need to do. When that happens, it's an added benefit that you're getting more visibility for females, but it is about who's right and what's the right team environment as well, isn't it?
Totally, Paul. Say over my career, I've worked with, I say I previously had an all-female management team. My last management team before I left Scottish Enterprise, where I was before, was an all-male team. And it's about the best people for the job, the right person for the job, and gender's just not an issue, And I don't think I've yet met a woman who would want to get a leadership job simply because she was a woman. You want to get the job because whoever is the hiring team, thinks you are the best person for that job at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, Liz, that being us three being all women, we would hate to get the job because we were women. That would not work if you get the job because you're the best person.
Yeah,
for the job.
because you're good at
that's
it.
a really important point. Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess, the whole point of International Women's Day and Break the Bias is that so that women are not, it's not about women getting opportunities because they're women. It's about women not having a barrier because they're a woman. So it's not about saying, oh, they didn't get that because they're a woman. They got it, in spite of the fact, so it's about that just making sure that barriers are removed, and there isn't that bias. And I guess one thing that may have contributed to the bias in recent years is the kind of negative stereotype of feminism can sometimes come up. Have you got any experience of that, or anything that could maybe counteract those negative stereotypes of feminism?
It's more quite subtle these days, Paul, that I think that it depends how it works in terms of if there are men in roles. They won't potentially admit that they have bias, but they might act slightly differently towards women rather than men. And I've definitely experienced that before. So you can see things are maybe a wee bit unequal, but there's no real rhyme or reason to it until you kind of look at the kind of gender balance. And there's probably still a wee bit of that goes on. And I think it's more about, that's more about the education piece and making sure that people, maybe they do it unconsciously and there's no badness kind of intended, but when you recognise it, you kind of do need to call it out a wee bit, I think, so that it doesn't continue, because if it happens with other people, then you can see that happening, that's going to be, the kind of the route that carries on down. So I think it's important when you see these things that I think all women have got a responsibility, or all men as well, have got a responsibility to kind of highlight those things, because it's very much just like anything else. You can fix it, can't you? There's opportunities there to fix it, and to, like, I think it was a really good reminder of what Andy Murray was saying. Venus and Serena, they were more decorated than Andy was until he kind of got those great results. But being able to recognise that you shouldn't carry these biases around with you, because then it's almost like that becomes the fact, doesn't it? So it's really just about being, when you can identify it, you do something about it. Or you say, if you don't want to, you say to someone else. I mean, generally all employers have got really good support networks now, and there's definitely ways that you can raise things if you feel uncomfortable about that, because that's the way that we'll make ourselves better, all in for everybody if we do that, take those positive steps. So again, the burden kind of comes to the woman, doesn't it, and lies on the woman, which is not ideal. You wouldn't want that to be, but it will move. If we do these things, it doesn't always sit there, it doesn't always lie there. And also, men can recognise that amongst their peer group as well. And I think that's any man, wanting to be involved in International Women's Day. It's looking, well, you've got a very important role to play as well in helping. And I think, Liz, you made a great point about, you, in your career, you learned from men. It didn't matter that it was a man; it could have equally have been a woman. But it's about fairness at the end of the day, isn't it? And if it's not fair, then you highlight it and you fix it and you move on. So we've definitely got the opportunity to do that when we do see those things occurring.
Yeah, and it's probably maybe it is more of the assumptions that people make that are the biggest barrier. Liz, Sharon, have you got any experience of that? Assumptions that males or even females make about other females.
I'm not sure that I have too many examples. I've got examples, actually. I remember at one stage in my career, a colleague had just been offered a new role and then discovered that she was pregnant. And she was actually nervous about telling the person she would be working for, who was a man, because she had made an assumption about how he would react and how he would behave. And in actual fact, when she told him, the first thing he said was, "Congratulations, that's great. Why would it make any difference to you coming into this new role?" So we can make, and I'm sure she made the assumption based on past experience that she'd had elsewhere, but oftentimes, people do surprise us, don't they? And we can make assumptions at all kind of levels rather than seek to, I suppose, assume that people would behave the way we would behave ourselves and how we would want them to behave.
Yeah. And I've actually seen that same thing happen. I had a good friend who actually she just told people that she was pregnant, and there was an opportunity for progression coming up, and we were at the same level. And I remember having that conversation with her to say, "You would be great in this role. Why don't we work together?" And then it's just, may the best person win. We're good friends. We'll go and we'll do this together. And she said, "But I'm pregnant." And, what's that got to do with it? And I actually ended up saying to her, "Well, what if, you got it? And then if I had the opportunity to cover your maternity cover, then that's me growing as well." So it is about that saying, so what? When it comes to those assumptions, if it's a female making about themselves or about other females, it's the so what. If it's a man that's doing it, Amy, like you said, it's about calling that out and going, no, that's not right. Sharon, have you got any of those kind of same experiences?
I can't think of anything. Sorry.
No, that's okay. But you were talking more about the kind of language that can sometimes be used, calling females girls, etc., and that kind of that patronising aspect of it.
I know, but sometimes I think that I think that's myself. Sometimes, like we were saying that the other day, when you're saying, right, bye ladies, bye girls, bye guys, then it becomes bye, because you're like, because I don't know. I think it's just sometimes people can get hung up, I think, sometimes on language. And I don't know if it's because I've got two girls, and I always think, especially I'm talking about the cleaning supervisors, right, who are two girls, they could be my daughters. So to me, I'm like, right, girls, see you tomorrow, girls. And then one day I said, I'm just thinking, if I upset you calling you as girls, and they're like, we love it. We like it because it makes us feel younger. And the guys, I'll just say to them, right, bye guys, whatever. And I think sometimes people get hung up on language, because I think sometimes people they're too easy to get offended at times when it's just how people speak at times. I mean, as we were talking the other day, I'm going back years ago, and was a facilities manager, and I was taking a contractor around, and I was showing them up the Renfrew building, want this done, that done. And I was actually, and they did the work, but I wasn't happy. And I was up and I said, "You've missed that bit, it was painting. I don't like how that wall looks. You've missed this bit out." And he kept calling me dear. "Right, dear, I'll do this." "Okay, dear." "Right, dear, we'll get the guys." And I stood and I went, "Would you mind stop calling me dear? My name is either Sharon. I said, "I just don't call me anything." He went, oh, okay, darling." And I was like, and it wasn't because I was offended he would call me dear, but he was doing it patronisingly. It was just kind of like, so you kind of, some kind of wee old granddad you might meet in the supermarket and they'll go, oh, thanks very much, dear, for helping. You don't get offended, you just take it. But he was doing it patronisingly. And I think you know the difference. You know the difference.
Yep.
Somebody's being patronising to you because I was pulling him up for a work because he was a man, he knew more, and he probably did know more about water-based paint at the time than I did. At that point, I was still going through my exams and studying sort of stuff, and people did know more about that. But I just thought, well, do you know what? The next time you come back, I'm going to know my stuff. So he quoted again for work later on, and I said to him, but when I brought it up, and I must remember, he did not call me dear, he called me Sharon straight away. And I thought, he's remembered that. And it was fine. I didn't hold grudges. We chatted away sort of thing. But then I started talking about water-based paint, and he was kind of on his game a wee bit more. And
Yeah.
I noted that, and I thought, right, okay, but he was being patronising, trying to bring me down a wee bit there to make it like I'm a wee bit more superior to you at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of good points in there, Sharon. One is that it's not necessarily about the language that's used, but the intent behind the language.
Yeah, how it should.
So, you know, when someone's using, you know, dear, hen, son, you know, a lot of this kind of Scottish terminology. You know, if it's an older person in the street who's saying that to you, it is meant, you know, nicely. You know that they're not trying
An
to
endearment.
patronise you, but in that situation, that is being patronising. And it's me. And the other good point I think you've made is when something is offensive, it's not about that person is, you know, necessarily trying to be offensive, but you might want to just delicately say, I actually don't like being called that, or that. And it's maybe not in the heat of the moment. It's maybe not you. It's maybe someone else who's observing that and going, that's maybe not the best thing to do. You know, I was very much in the habit of calling people guys collectively. Male and female, and it took someone to say, you know, females might not like being called guys, and I went, yeah, it's just something that I've always said. So it's, you know, just getting yourself out of the habit of saying these things because it might not be inclusive or it might even be offensive. So when someone's saying it to you, it's taking that food for thought and going, you know, and sometimes I will still slip up and go, guys, and go, it's not what I meant to say. But again, it comes back to that intent, doesn't it?
Yeah, how you say it.
Well, I think we're nearly running out of time. And I guess what I'll do now is just come to each of you just for, you know, final remarks or anything that you think that, you know, the next time, you know, we talk about International Women's Day, or, you know, it's all year round. It's not just about a dedicated day. Just if you got any final remarks, Sharon.
I just like to say to females, celebrate your achievements, blow your own trumpet, say how good you are and how you're good at your job and everything. Because if you don't say it, okay, some people might say it for you, but sometimes take pride in yourself and just go out there and just say, look where I am today and look what I can do.
Thank you. Amy?
I would say believe in yourself and your abilities and don't be afraid to be confident.
And Liz?
And to add to that, Paul, I would say support other women, you know, help other women who need help, you know, particularly as they're starting out in their career, and just be supportive of each other, you know, so that collectively women can continue to make the impact that we know that they can.
So thank you all. And from your male ally, a very happy International Women's Day.
Thanks very much, Paul.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.